Hello, everyone. I hope you're doing well. My name is Anya Behan, and I am presenting on the Big Five personality traits or personality tests. So, the Big Five didn't come up all at once. It was more of a dwindling of pool of traits that many psychologists collaborated on. So today it's a widely accepted model for personality in academic psychology. As I mentioned before, it was developed by many psychologists using thousands of personality traits. So Gordon Allport and Henry Audebert first created a list of 4,500 traits in 1936. In the 1940s, Raymond Cattell and his colleagues narrowed the list to 16 traits. And then after that, many other psychologists, including Louis Goldberg, felt that the list could be narrowed down even further. Goldberg also advocated that there were 5 primary traits, and McCrae and Costa expanded on Goldberg's work and confirmed the model's validity over many cultures. Then they agreed upon openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism as the Big Five model. So the acronym for this is OCEAN, which helped me. I've learned about this in other previous classes, so it helps me remember OCEAN. Some articles I've read use canoe, but I prefer ocean as it's used more often. So to find out kind of where you fall for each factor, you normally would fill out a questionnaire asking you many questions. I took one that was 50 questions, and you rate each statement. You agree with it, you're neutral about it, or you disagree. I provided a link for the tests, the personality test I took. Feel free to take it or not. One of my questions I posted was, it asks you to take the test and talk about it a little bit. So instead of each factor being like you're completely open or you're completely closed, each factor is measured more on a continuum rather than black and white, either or. So I put a picture here kind of showing that this is just a picture I found on one of the articles I read, showing like, you know, most people fall somewhere in between, you know, high or low. So for example, when they say someone scored high in conscientiousness, it doesn't mean that they're 100% conscientious. In this picture, it looks like they're very conscientious. But that would be an example of a high score. A lower score, as you could see here, this person is not as open. You know, they seem to be more reserved and closed off. Same with neuroticism on here. They tend to be on the lower end. So from what I've seen, it seems like high score is above 50% and a low score is below 50%. And so also, being that these factors were dwindled down from a list starting at 4,500, each of these traits can include other traits. For example, extroversion can include assertiveness, energy level, warmth, and sense of adventure. Now I'm going to get into each factor, starting with openness. And openness refers to people's openness to try new things or openness to engage in creative or outside of the box thinking. People who score higher in openness tend to be creative thinkers. They're curious about the world around them and are usually more open to new experiences. People who score lower tend to prefer routine, they're uncomfortable with change, and they find it difficult to think abstractly or creatively. Next, we have conscientiousness. Conscientiousness considers people's ability to engage in structured or goal-oriented behavior and their ability to control impulses. So those who score higher here tend to be organized, self-disciplined, and these things allow them to achieve goals and complete tasks. Whereas people who score lower tend to be disorganized, they have a hard time controlling impulses, they may procrastinate, and all of these things hinder their ability to complete tasks or achieve goals. Here we have extroversion. Some people say extroversion. Here I say extraversion. They're both the same. Extroversion examines people's tendency and degree of seeking interaction with their environment, especially social interaction. This category can also be seen as noticing where people get their energy from. So people who score higher tend to get their energy from social interaction. People who score lower tend to get their energy from solitude. People with higher scores also tend to be social, outgoing, and excitement seeking. People with lower scores prefer to be alone. They feel drained with too much social interaction, and they're usually more reserved and reflective. You can also think of low score being introversion. You may have heard introvert versus extrovert. The Myers-Briggs also, that test talks about extroversion and introversion. Agreeableness refers to how people orient themselves in their relationships with others and how they interact with those they have relationships with. So think of trusting versus skepticism, compliant versus stubborn, empathetic versus lack of concern for others. So people who score higher in this category tend to be more trusting of others, modest, altruistic, or wanting to help other people. They are more compliant. You can think of more agreeable. They also tend to be sympathetic and empathetic. And people who score lower tend to be skeptical of other people's motives. They can be demanding. They may belittle other people. They're stubborn and unsympathetic towards other people's feelings. People who tend to be more agreeable are usually seen as trustworthy, likable, and kind. And people who don't tend to be as agreeable or score lower, people don't necessarily trust them or see them as likable. The last category of the Big Five is neuroticism. Neuroticism looks at how stable people's emotions are and is based on how they perceive the world, negatively or positively. With people who score higher, here they tend to see things more negatively. They're usually more anxious, possibly hostile. Their mood or emotions are vulnerable. They may be self-conscious and have dramatic shifts in their mood. On the other hand, people who score lower tend to have a more positive view of things. They tend to be more calm, confident, they're not as anxious, more relaxed. They also rarely report that they feel sad or depressed and are more resilient in their outcome. Some things to consider about the Big Five model are that these traits tend to be stable and consistent over people's lifetime. So people who score high in neuroticism usually tend to remain there, although people may be able to shift intentionally, say if they're going through therapy for their anxiety, that may help them lower their score, meaning they may become more calm. Also, generally, a lot of people may score a little lower later in life on their openness. They may feel that they are satisfied with where they've gone in life and want to settle down and may not want to experience many new things. But that doesn't mean they're way less open. It's just saying that people may shift, but in general, these traits, people's traits, tend to be stable through their lifetime. Also, this model isn't necessarily for diagnoses. It seems what I've read to be more for academic purposes, for people in the behavior sciences, although this test can be helpful in determining people's general picture of their personality and their character. Why is this important? Because we know that mental health has impact on our physical health. And so some factors such as neuroticism can be seen as a risk indicator for certain mental illnesses, which can also lead to, say, heart disease. If you're stressed a lot, your blood pressure is going to be elevated more often and you're more at risk for heart disease. And being in a state of anxiety for long periods of time is not good for your mental health. Other factors such as extroversion and agreeableness can be indicators of, be seen as preventative factors for mental illnesses. So people who are more calm and open will not be as worried, and their blood pressure isn't going to be as high as someone who's more anxious often. And being more calm and positive thinking definitely has impacts on your mental health. You will likely have better cardiovascular health and digestive health. Something I forgot to quickly talk about regarding the Big Five personality traits. These traits are also informative when looking at your interactions with other people in your community, your relationships. It can also be helpful when considering your career. So if you're more extroverted and you enjoy interacting with people, you may prefer a career that is where you interact with people, whereas someone who's more introverted may prefer solitude and be more productive not interacting with people and For example, maybe in a lab environment or over the phone. It's also helpful, like I said, regarding your relationships with other people. Say, there's always going to be times of disagreement when you're interacting with somebody or a group of people. Looking at these factors can be helpful when you're maybe trying to resolve conflict with a coworker or your friend. It's, for example, say you are more neurotic, so you may have anxiety, you may be skeptical. Sorry, that's agreeableness. But say you're low, you have a low score in agreeableness and a high score in neuroticism. You may worry a lot, you may be skeptical of others. So this may help you understand if you're having a hard time trusting other people or getting along with others. You may score higher in neuroticism and lower in agreeableness. And the benefit of this is being aware of these things. You may be able to approach a resolution in your hardships or your conflicts with others, being aware of how your personality traits are. So I hope this helps. I hope it made sense. I have my list of resources where I got this information on my last slide. Speaking about these factors in relation to mental health and physical health, I found a study done last year regarding COVID-19 and people's mental health. The study was done by researchers in the UK, and they had about 500 US citizens fill out these questionnaires last year, about middle of last year. So after the pandemic started, they were curious to see where people's anxiety and depression, where it was because of the pandemic. So they didn't just fill out the Big Five questionnaire. There were several others, but because they used the Big Five as well, I figured I could use this. And they did talk about their scores for each factor. They found that people who scored higher in neuroticism had positive correlations with many areas of anxiety and depressive symptoms. People who scored higher in openness and agreeableness had negative correlations with anxiety and depression. So what does this mean? People who tended to be more neurotic were likely to suffer from anxiety, such as health anxiety, worried about their health, worried about contracting the virus. They tended to be more depressed, likely because they were isolating themselves and saw things more negatively, like we were talking about. And then they also found that, people who were more open, even more extroverted, had less anxiety. So like we were talking about, these other factors being more protective against mental illness and physical illness. This study was able to support those hypotheses about these factors indicating mental health. So I hope that this has been enlightening and informative. I enjoyed looking into this. Next, I have my questions. And I also hope that going over the lists and each factor was helpful and gave you a clear idea of where you or others may fall in these categories. Okay, so here are my questions. I put 2 because maybe not everyone wants to take the test. So my first question, before you answer the question, take the personality test that I provide the link to in my original post, not on the PowerPoint, but on my post. I'll label that. And after you take the test, did you find anything new about yourself? Also, is there anything you didn't like or did like about the test? Or the next question, considering what we've covered in the presentation, what are some advantages and what are some disadvantages of the Big 5 personality test? I hope you all are well and have a great weekend. Talk to you later. Finally, here are my references.